I had originally made this desktop waterfall in early August and it was beautiful. I was really happy with how it had turned out. But then I went out of town for a couple weeks, which would have been fine, but when I came back, I was sick. I ended up being away from the studio for much longer than I anticipated, and well, I came back to this. That was hard to come back to, but it is a good opportunity to talk about how to fix a problem should you encounter one with your project. Now, before I left, I did cover it in this piece of plastic from some old shipping materials to help hold in the moisture. Because anytime you have an open air project like this, it's going to lose moisture pretty fast. And I think that some of the plants really benefited from that moisture and others were not a fan. So the first thing we need to address is this really gross brown water. And that's from the driftwood that I used leaching its tannins, even though I did boil it 3 separate times in hopes that that wouldn't happen. So let's go ahead and start with a water change. And to do that, I'm just using this old piece of tubing and I'm going to hold both ends so they're facing upwards and then fill it up with water until it reaches the top. I'll cap one end with one hand and then take the other end and place it into the water. Then I'll take the capped end and release that into a bucket that's sitting below the water line, and that'll help siphon out all of the old water from the setup. Side note, you want to make sure that the pump is turned off when you're doing the water change. And then I'll just fill it back up with some more distilled water and then repeat that process a couple more times until the water is running clear. Now, as far as the regular maintenance for a project like this, I'd recommend doing a water change about once a week, and that should help keep the setup from getting too murky. Now let's talk about some of the things that are doing pretty well in this setup. And the first one is pretty obvious, the string of frogs. The cuttings that I used have really taken off, and you can see there's a lot of new growth here. Now, the other plant that seems to be pretty happy are these Anubias Nana Petit, and I think that they really benefited from having the additional moisture from having that plastic on top, and I kind of worry about them now that it's going to be an open air project again, so I'll have to keep an eye on those. And the plant that's kind of iffy are these asparagus ferns. So this one here looks like it's doing okay, but there are a couple leaves that are going to need to be trimmed off. And I'll just use these long scissors that I have that are pretty helpful for a project like this. And I'll just cut out any of the leaves that are dying or don't look too good. Now, on the other side, this asparagus fern is completely cooked and will need to be removed entirely. And I'm pretty sure on this side it was getting too much moisture on its leaves, and this plant does not like to have its leaves saturated, so it's gonna have to go. Now, the other thing that we have to look at is the moss, and when I take it out of here, you can see there is a little bit of green, but the majority of it has gone brown. And I think the reason for that is because while this is a plant that likes moisture, it doesn't like to be waterlogged. And the waterfall was on a timer for while I was gone, so it was running, but because of the plastic on top, it wasn't really getting a chance to dry out like it's supposed to. And so I think it was just waterlogged, and that's the reason it's looking the way it is. And unfortunately, it's gonna all have to be replaced. And I'll just grab a piece of moss from my moss box that I had collected from a hike, and I'll just cut it into smaller sections. And that way I can work it in between the rocks to fill up the back wall. And then once I have that back wall completely filled in, the last thing I need to do is fill it up with some distilled water. And then turn it on. And as long as I'm not going out of town anytime soon, we should be in good shape. But be sure to follow along and then check back for more updates.